Welcome back to Coin Crusader, the channel where we cut through the noise and get straight to what actually matters in the world of crypto. I'm glad you're here today because what we're about to break down is one of those moments where you need to stop scrolling, sit down, and actually pay attention. Most people out there are still waiting for some kind of dramatic signal, some big flashing light, some moment where a financial pundit on cable news turns to the camera and says, "Okay, now it's time." But that's just not how this works. That's never been how this works. The biggest moves in this market don't come with a trumpet fanfare and a countdown clock. They come quietly, steadily, methodically. The rails are being upgraded right now. The institutions are moving in right now. Balance sheets are shifting. Infrastructure is being laid down. And by the time the average person wakes up and realizes what happened, the people who were paying attention, the ones who did the research, who watched the signals, who stayed patient, they're already in position. They're already set up. And that's exactly what Coin Crusader is here to help you do. So let's talk about what's actually going on, because this isn't about one single headline or one single story. This is a puzzle. And right now, every single piece of that puzzle is snapping into place at the same time. And one of the biggest pieces that just landed, and I genuinely don't think enough people are talking about it with the weight it deserves, is what Brad Garlinghouse said seemingly out of nowhere. The CEO of Ripple came out and announced that by 2026, Ripple expects their non-XRP revenue, meaning revenue that does not come from selling XRP tokens, to hit $1 billion. Let that sink in for a second. $1 billion from custody services, from stablecoin operations, from their payments business, which is absolutely firing on all cylinders right now. This is enormous, and if you don't immediately understand why, let me break it down for you, because this changes the entire conversation around Ripple as a company. For years, and I mean years, one of the loudest criticisms leveled against Ripple was that their entire business model was essentially just selling XRP. Critics would say, they're not a real company, they don't have real revenue streams, they're just dumping tokens on the market. That was the argument. And now Brad Garlinghouse is standing up and saying, actually, we're about to generate $1 billion from real business operations. Custody, stablecoins, enterprise payments. These are legitimate, scalable, recurring revenue streams. That is a completely different company than the one the critics were describing. And when you combine this kind of revenue growth with everything else that's happening around XRP right now, the picture starts to look very different than what most people are assuming. This is a company that is growing up in real time, diversifying its income, and preparing for something much bigger. And here's the real reason this matters beyond just the revenue number itself. Why is Brad telling us this right now? Why make this announcement at this specific moment? Think about it from a business strategy perspective. You don't go out and publicly project $1 billion in non-token revenue unless you're preparing to show that revenue to a very specific and very important audience, investors, analysts, Wall Street. Because I am willing to bet, and I'd bet with real confidence here, that Ripple is gearing up to go public. An IPO is coming, probably next year. And when that happens, when Ripple starts filing quarterly reports and earnings statements and all the financial disclosures that come with being a publicly traded company, every single analyst on Wall Street is going to be digging through those numbers. They are going to be covering Ripple the same way they cover Apple or Microsoft or JP Morgan. And every single conversation about Ripple's business will naturally and inevitably lead back to XRP. There is no other cryptocurrency in this entire space that is going to have that kind of consistent, mainstream, institutional-grade media coverage. None. Now let's zoom out a little and look at what's happening on-chain, because this is where things get really interesting. There was a great breakdown posted on X by the account XFinanceBull, and the data he's pointing to is the kind of stuff that should have every serious investor paying attention. On-chain data, and remember, this is the most reliable data we have because unlike exchange data, it's not distorted by wash trading or other manipulation. On-chain data is showing that whales accumulated 190 million XRP in a single week. 1 week. That is not casual buying. That is not someone adding a little to their portfolio. That is deliberate, strategic, large-scale accumulation by entities that have access to information and analysis that most retail investors simply don't have. Whales don't move like that without a reason. They don't spend that kind of money on a hunch. They've done the work, they've run the numbers, and they are positioning themselves ahead of something. And there's more to the on-chain story than just whale accumulation. Ripple's CBDC platform, their central bank digital currency infrastructure, is now active in 6 countries. 6 separate sovereign nations are using Ripple's technology to move money at the government level. And this isn't static. Every single integration that gets added raises the baseline of utility and demand for the XRP ledger. The Evernorth analysis that was making the rounds recently made this incredibly clear. When you actually look at XRP ledger transaction data, it is not speculative. It is not driven by hype cycles. It is utility-based. It is steady. It is building incrementally over time, integration by integration, country by country, institution by institution. The foundation is being laid in a way that is designed to last, and the whales accumulating right now understand exactly what that foundation means for the future price of XRP. Here's another development that deserves serious attention, and this one is particularly exciting because of what it means for real-world enterprise adoption. Ripple customers can now add XRP and RLUSD, their US dollar peg stablecoin, directly to their treasury accounts, with the entire blockchain infrastructure already handled on the back end. Read that again. The infrastructure is already taken care of. Companies that want to adopt this technology don't have to build custom blockchain systems from scratch. They don't need a team of blockchain engineers. They don't need months of development time and millions of dollars in custom integration work. It's already built in. It's already there, sitting in the back end of the software they're already using. And when these companies look at what crypto assets are available to them through this system, guess what they're going to see? They're going to see XRP. They're going to see RLUSD. And when you give a business a tool that makes their payments faster, cheaper, more efficient, and easier to track, and that tool is already integrated into the platform they're already paying for, they're going to use it. That's just basic human nature. Remove the barriers, and adoption follows. Think about what this means at scale. We're not talking about tech-forward crypto startups here. We're talking about large enterprises, traditional companies, institutions that have historically been slow to adopt new financial technology. These are the kinds of organizations that would normally spend years evaluating a new payment system before touching it. But if XRP and RLUSD are already embedded in the platform they're already using, the decision becomes much simpler. You don't have to convince them to take a leap of faith. You just have to show them the dashboard and say, hey, you want faster payments, lower fees, and better tracking? It's right here, one click. That is how you get mass adoption, not through persuasion, through convenience. And Ripple has figured that out in a way that nobody else in this space has. Now let's talk about something that genuinely made me stop and think when I saw it while scrolling through X the other day. Franklin Templeton Digital Assets was out there actively promoting their spot XRP ETF. Franklin Templeton, one of the most well-respected, well-established asset managers in the entire world. Not some crypto-native startup, not some fringe investment fund. Franklin Templeton, marketing an XRP ETF. And I want you to really absorb how significant that is, because not that long ago, not even that many years ago, this would have been the biggest news in the entire crypto industry. This would have been headlines everywhere, and now it's just happening, quietly, as part of normal business. That's actually a sign of how far we've come, and it's a sign of what's coming next when the broader market really starts to move. Here's what really gets me excited about the ETF piece specifically. In every previous bull run, 2017, 2018, 2021, XRP ran without any of this infrastructure. There were no ETFs. There was no direct US exposure through regulated financial products. If you wanted XRP back in those years, you had to jump through hoops. You had to move Ethereum or Litecoin to an exchange that actually carried XRP, deal with the friction, deal with the regulatory uncertainty. And even with all of that friction, even with all of those barriers, XRP still ran in ways that were absolutely breathtaking. Now imagine what happens when all of that friction is gone. When any American investor, retail or institutional, can get direct XRP exposure through a regulated ETF product with a single click through their existing brokerage account. When the alt season hits and money starts rotating hard into assets beyond Bitcoin and Ethereum, and XRP has this entire institutional infrastructure behind it that simply did not exist before, the growth potential is going to be unlike anything we've seen. The past runs were incredible, with far less support than what's being built right now. And speaking of ETF momentum, the combined daily volume across XRP/ETFs recently crossed $54 million. And this is important. It's been growing steadily with no significant outflows. That's a healthy, building market, not a pump and dump, not a flash of interest followed by a retreat. Steady, growing, consistent demand. And then there's the question that is absolutely on everyone's mind in this community right now. When does BlackRock file for an XRP ETF? Because when that happens, and I genuinely believe it's a matter of when, not if, the entire landscape changes overnight. BlackRock's involvement in Bitcoin ETFs transformed that market in ways that even optimists didn't fully predict. The same thing will happen with XRP when the world's largest asset manager decides it's time to move. Let me pivot to something that doesn't get enough credit in mainstream crypto conversations. The XRP Ledger upgrade, version 3.2, which just rolled out. Now, I know when people hear software upgrade, their eyes can glaze over a little. This doesn't feel as exciting as an ETF announcement or a whale accumulation story. But pay attention because this is actually huge. This upgrade is renaming the core server software from Rippled to XRPLD, which properly aligns the naming with the network as its own independent entity, which is exactly how it should be positioned. But more importantly, this upgrade is expected to reduce memory usage on nodes by somewhere between 30 and 40%. That is a massive efficiency improvement. That means running a node becomes more accessible. That means the network can scale more effectively. This is not a flashy consumer feature. This is foundational infrastructure work, and it is exactly the kind of thing that needs to be done before any network can handle truly institutional scale volume. The people building the XRP ledger are thinking years ahead. They are building for a future where this network is handling trillions of dollars in transactions. And that's exactly the kind of long-term thinking that should give every XRP holder confidence. Over in South Korea, things are absolutely on fire. And honestly, I love it every single time this happens, because South Korea has always been one of XRP's strongest markets. XRP just flipped Bitcoin on Upbit, South Korea's largest exchange, hitting $131 million in 24-hour volume and capturing 12.6% of the platform's total trading volume. And if you want a little historical context here, back in 2017, when XRP was running past Ethereum and the numbers were getting absolutely wild, data aggregators literally had to make a decision about whether to include South Korean exchange data because XRP's dominance there was so extreme it was skewing global price numbers. They pulled it out of the calculations. They said it didn't count, and XRP still ran anyway. South Korea is not a side note in the XRP story. It is one of the core pillars of global XRP demand, and the activity we're seeing there right now is a very positive sign. Now let's address the sentiment picture, because this is actually one of the most interesting and counterintuitive data points in the market right now. CoinDesk's XRP social sentiment tracker has just hit its lowest reading since October 2025. And I know that sounds like bad news. I know that feels discouraging when you see a headline like that. But if you've been in this market long enough, you know that extreme negative sentiment, peak pessimism, maximum discouragement, the moment when everyone online is saying XRP is dead and nothing will ever happen, that is historically one of the most reliable signals that a reversal is close. When the last of the weak hands capitulate, when the sellers have already sold, when the people who are going to panic have already panicked, there's nobody left to push the price down. And then the buyers, the ones who held, the ones who accumulated, the ones who understood what was actually being built. They take over. We might be sitting right at that inflection point right now. At least that's what the data is suggesting. And to round out the big picture here, X-Finance Bull put together a fantastic breakdown of the 3 enterprise-grade cryptocurrencies most likely to see real institutional adoption: XRP, Stellar, XLM, and Canton Network's C-Coin. And the point he makes that really resonates is this: while retail investors are nervous about price action, the enterprises that are actually building on these networks are not slowing down, not even slightly. XRP remains the giant in payments and settlement. XLM is powering global payment rails and financial inclusion. Canton Network, partnered with names like Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, and Moody's, is building institutional settlement infrastructure. And there's significant cross-compatibility between these networks, meaning the ecosystem is becoming more interconnected and more powerful over time. We are watching a new global financial system being assembled in real time, piece by piece, partnership by partnership, and XRP is sitting at the center of it. Finally, we have to talk about the Clarity Act, because regulatory clarity is the last major unlock that this whole ecosystem needs. There are reports that the bill could still pass this year, but with only a handful of working days left before congressional recess, the window is tight. Lawmakers still need to resolve ethics concerns, merge competing versions of the legislation, and clear procedural hurdles. A July 4th deadline looks ambitious. But here's the thing: even if it slips past July 4th, getting it done before the midterms is absolutely critical. If this bill doesn't pass before the midterm election cycle begins to dominate the political conversation in Washington, the chances of getting it done drop significantly. The good news is that money talks in Washington. There is enormous financial incentive on all sides to get something done. I think a compromise gets made. I think lawmakers find enough common ground to move this forward. And when they do, when that regulatory clarity finally arrives, Ripple and XRP are going to be positioned better than anyone else in this industry to capitalize on it. That's the moment everything accelerates. That's the moment the puzzle is complete. And as always, Coin Crusader is going to be right here, covering every single step of the way. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop a like if this brought you value, and let me know in the comments, do you think the Clarity Act gets done before July 4th? I want to hear from you.